Today we're going to be talking about the oral law demysticized. Mysticized. Yeah, one of those two. So I'm going to be showing you proofs as to why an oral law is absolutely necessary, and it's all going to be connected to missionaries. So sit tight. We will be right back. Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with episode number 2 of Missionaries. That's right, you heard it right. Missionaries. I was thinking it was like missionized missionaries, but no, missionaries. You heard it right. Good to see you back, my brother. Looking forward to your little. Not little at all. None of your teachings are little. They're quite huge. So hopefully everybody else will find the same appreciation as I do. So, and I know they have because it's been hitting a lot of hits on YouTube. So that's really cool. People are learning and they're getting excited about it, you know. So very good. Baruch Hashem. Welcome back.
I'm doing great. I hope you're doing fine.
Yes. Turn your camera back to your left a little bit, or yeah, there you go.
Okay, we're good.
Close enough. It's still a little off, but it's okay. We'll work with it.
You want me to go closer? I'll go closer. Okay. I'm fine. Better?
Yeah, that'll work. Let's go with that. All right. That sounds good.
Right.
Well, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. And this is going to be an exciting show because missionaries love to bash and love to love the Talmud. They have this love-hate relationship. So today's topics covered, we're going to do, that's the second slide, is going to be discussing what the oral law is. We're going to talk briefly about reasons the church is against the Talmud, discuss how you can't read the Hebrew scriptures without it, mention some of the things we mentioned on last week's show the New Testament refers to the oral law, and demonstrate, this is going to be the kicker, demonstrate how Christianity's claim to Jesus' messiahship depends on the oral law. So the oral law is needed to actually give some context for Jesus' claim, not that he really has a claim, which we'll talk about as well. So let's kick it off. Let's talk about the written Torah at Sinai. Will, if you don't mind just streaming it on YouTube.
We are. Oh, you know
okay.
what? It actually doesn't. It doesn't
okay.
say. It's actually flickering in and out. I have no idea why.
All right, so I got it.
We got it. We're recording on the hard drive anyway, so even if we miss some, I'll upload it when we're done. So I've got your.
So the written Torah, yeah.
Go ahead. Slide 1 is up.
Okay, so we're at the slide with the mountain, the written Torah at Sinai. The Torah was given to over 3 million people. Exodus 19:16.
Oh, okay, there we go. Got it.
Yeah. So Exodus 19:16 says, "And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mountain, and the voice of the trumpet exceeded loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled." So the Torah was given, and the problem is that missionaries will just make you believe, and people in general don't realize this, that there were actually 2 sets of Torahs given, one written and one oral. Now, with everything that I say, I'm going to bring evidence. I'm not just going to be like a missionary and just shoot things off the top of my head. I'm actually going to prove what I have to say. But before we do that, we're going to discuss what the oral Torah is. I'm going to talk about the next slide. Maimonides opens his introduction to his codification of the Torah law. Maimonides was one of the greatest rabbis that ever lived, one of the first main codifiers, lived over 1,000 years ago. He was born in Cordova in Spain, and he migrated to Israel. And he wrote something called the Mishnah Torah. Actually, he was in Egypt, and then he ended up in Israel. He wrote the Mishnah Torah with a statement based on Talmud Brachot 5a. All the mitzvahs that were given to Moses at Sinai were given with their explanation. As it is written, I will give the tablets a stone, and the Torah and the mitzvahs. The Torah that is written, the Torah and the mitzvah, this is the explanation. And he commanded us to fulfill the Torah in accordance with the mitzvah. The mitzvah is what is called the oral Torah. Indeed, the two are inseparable, as no text can have any authoritative meaning without any accompanying tradition as to what it means and what are the principles that govern its interpretation. And the truth is, in society, anything that we do as a matter of fact, like how do we know that the word window is window? How do we know that this is a book? Because it was passed down orally, as languages were. But that's not the main point here. We're going to talk about facts, and it's all about the facts. I just want you to understand something. Any Christians that are listening to the show, I'm not here to give you a theological black eye. That's not my purpose here. I'm not here to browbeat anybody. I'm here to present information for you to see it. I'm going to do it in the most unbiased way possible, and then you come to your own conclusion. So for centuries, the oral law was transmitted orally from sages to their students. There was actually there was a prohibition at the time to write it down. And I mean, just the logical reason behind it is it's very simple. If you write it down, you're not going to remember it as well as if you commit it to memory. Makes sense, Will?
Right. Absolutely.
You have to really. It's a lot of information, but people were passing it down from generation to generation, and they got it. So this prohibition was in force, but unfortunately, because of the Roman Empire's persecution of the Jews, as well as other empires, people start to forget it because they're busy on the run, trying to save their own lives, hiding in caves, in gullies, and river basins, trying to evade capture. So that unfortunately caused stuff to be forgotten. So Rabbi Yehuda the Prince did something called the Harat Shah, which was basically an exception to the rule, and he ruled that the oral Torah can be written down. So it was written down briefly in something called the Mishnah, very, very brief, still required a lot of memory, but at least something was written down. And as persecution continued on forward, the Babylonian Talmud was redacted by Ravina and Rav Ashi, two great Amoraim. These were the students, the next generations after the Tanoim, and they wrote something called the Babylonian Talmud, which explains the Mishnah. Again, making the oral law, which of course explains the written law. This was finished at around the year 500 to 530. And of course, there was a Jerusalem Talmud as well that was written for the same purpose, but that's not going to be the subject of today's talk because the Jerusalem Talmud is not studied as widely as is the Babylonian Talmud. And the differences are in the language, and they do disagree as to what the actual final law is, because till you hash out the law, there are some different opinions of what the correct law is. But I'm not going to get into that because that's another conversation of how the law actually was hashed out, all the different opinions, and how that ended up being what we practice today. Then if we move to the next slide, to Masoretic text. Now, I want to spend some time on the Masoretic text. Will, I'm sure you've heard a lot of chatter way back. You've heard a lot of missionaries talking about how the Masoretic text is a fabrication. Mm-hmm. They're these Masoretes, it's kind of like the Dirty Dozen that gets behind the enemy lines, and let's make everybody believe in something that doesn't exist. So let me demystify that. Understand that the Torah scroll as we have it today, if you go into any synagogue that has an authentic Torah scroll, there are no vowels, all right? Mm-hmm. How do we know how to read it? As they say in Yiddish, how do we lane a Sefer Torah? The reading of a Sefer Torah is through tradition. It says Bereshis bara Elokim, right? In the beginning, God created the world. How do we know it's Bereshis, not Berashis? How do we know how to read it? So that's transmitted orally. So as with anything else, the rabbis called the Masoretes, who were really a part of the generation of rabbis called the Gaonim and the Savaroim, who lived before Rashi and the Tosafos before the year of 1000. We're talking about the 7th to 10th centuries. They got together and they created a convention that would basically codify what these sounds are. So just like you have trup, which are the musical cantillations, they came up with something called nekudot, little dots, like a kamatz and a tzere and a sego, for those of you who are learning Hebrew, for those of you who are not. I'm sure Will can give you some resources. So the actual dots as to what the sounds are represented, meaning an A or an were created, the actual symbols. But the text itself was true. We never changed the text. And for missionaries to say that, well, the Aleppo Codex and all that other stuff, we have the Septuagint, it's nonsense. The original document always has primacy over what is to be considered a translation. And there's a concept in Talmud, and I'll say it in Hebrew, and then I'll translate it for everybody. Hamotze mechavero alav haraya. If somebody wants to take something out of somebody's possession, you have to bring proof. So if you, the missionary out there, wants to say that the Torah that we have is not authentic, is not real, has been tampered with, then the burden of proof is on you, because we were around before you were. So you can't tell me how to read my Bible when your Bible has its own issues. It's very comical. I mean, if you can imagine, Will, if you're at you do building for your work, right? You do construction. So right. I teach. So imagine if I came over to you and start telling you how to build a wall, how to look for studs. You look at me like, no offense, Ezriel, what do you know about building? I mean, it's not your forte. So therefore, the people these great rabbis who knew what they were talking about should not be questioned, because who's questioning them? People who themselves don't know the information well. So that's not really a very, very smart thing to do. Any questions, Will?
Not yet.
Has everything been clear so?
Yes.
Good so far?
So far, so good.
Now, let's go to some of the reasons that the church hates the Talmud. And I'm going to give you a quote. Before we even read this, I'm going to give you a quote from the Council of Nicaea. This comes from Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Biblical. I'm not selling, he's not a salesman, but it's a great book. On page 7 of volume 1, he has a bunch of quotes, anti-Semitic quotes, for some notable people, Christian theologians who people venerate. So these are what we call the Gedolim, the great people, and I put that in quotation marks, of the Christian world. So the Council of Nicaea rejected the Jewish roots of Christianity. This is a direct quote. It separated the celebration of Easter from the Jewish Passover, stating, "For it is unbecoming beyond measure that on this holiest of festivals we should follow a custom of the Jews. Henceforth, let us have nothing in common with this odious people." Wow, I feel loved when I read stuff
Right.
like that. Talk about being politically correct. I guess it didn't exist in those days. So understand that there is a 11.5-day difference between the lunar calendar and the solar calendar, okay? And what the Jews do is they have a combination of both. They intercalculate, they put in what we call a leap year and an extra month, and that is all based on the oral law, which is brought down in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, which is not the topic of today's conversation, today's lecture. It's a very complicated topic. I believe I saw it on episode 33 with Rabbi Singer. He goes through it and he explains it very, very well. Will, if you'd like, you could put a link in for those people who want to understand how the Jewish calendar works.
Gotcha.
So what the Council of Nicaea did said, listen, for the first 2 centuries of Christianity, Christians, they didn't have like a Jewish bank to go to get a calendar. Hey, Chaim, can you pick me up a Jewish calendar? It didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So the Jewish calendar, which there is no Jewish calendar in any of the 5 books of Moses. There's no the way that the months are set up are not there. You don't need to have 12 months. It's not a biblical law to have 12 months. So they would depend on us to know when Passover was, when Rosh Chodesh Nisan was, the first day of Nisan, so they could figure out when Easter would fall out. So they depended on us. So the Council of Nicaea wanted to tear away from that. And also, I have my own personal reason why they don't want the Talmud. The Talmud brings clarity. What missionaries like to do is they like fuzziness. They like the world of the underworld. How can we twist passages? So you have to understand that when passages are clear, that's when they get nuts, and that's when they get really nervous. So just to give you a sad historical perspective, the Talmud was actually burnt, and the perpetrator of this crime was an apostate Jew. And the sad thing is, the Jews' greatest enemies most of the time are wayward Jews that were not, unfortunately turned away. There was a guy named Nicholas Dunnan. I don't know his Hebrew name, but maybe his name was Nehemiah, who knows. He was excommunicated by his community, and he got a personal audience with Pope Gregory, and convinced him that the Talmud was anti-Semitic. Now, the Talmud really is not the Jesus of the Talmud, and again, this is a class in and of itself. The Jesus of the Talmud is not the Jesus of Tanakh. We're not going to explain why. That's another show. But he convinced him that the Talmud says a whole bunch of other stuff. And instead of verifying it and actually looking at it, it didn't take much to really get the Catholic Church to go against the Jews. It didn't require that much pushing. So 24 wagon loads of handwritten Talmuds were burnt in France on June 17, 1242. This is actually memorialized on Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, when we commemorate the burning of the Beis HaMikdash, the holy temples, both of them. We actually have a liturgy. We have a special, we call a kinnis, a sad song, a sad prayer, which commemorates this horrible situation. I just want you to put that in perspective. The burning of the Talmud, remember, everything was handwritten. So the burning of the Talmud would be equivalent to, God forbid, taking every Jewish bookstore, let's say in Israel, burning it down, and then destroying every hard drive that has every backup of everything. Will, can you imagine what that would be? Can you just imagine the theological carnage? That would be the equivalent of burning the Library of Alexandria, which was a terrible tragedy. A lot of books of antiquity were destroyed. So you have to understand the church really has it in for it. Constantine definitely, in his screed, and this is part of what Constantine said that I just quoted from the first volume of Rabbi Singer's book. You know what? they're not very happy with the Talmud. But what I find funny is, and I've seen some missionary people out there, some gentleman with the last name that rhymes with clown, he was quoting from Gemara Rosh Hashanah, tractate Rosh Hashanah, trying to prove that the last 40 years, the white ribbon that was between the horns of the animal that was thrown over the cliff during the Yom Kippur service didn't turn white, it stayed red. And of course, it's because they killed Jesus, offering no evidence where it says that in the Talmud. I really love it when, I'm walking down the train station and I see this guy saying, look, the tractate Sanhedrin says da 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 da. I went over to one of these guys. I said, here's a tractate Sanhedrin. Open it, find the page, and read it for me. I mean, I don't read Greek, so I'm not going to claim to say, well, I could take a Greek New Testament and start reading it. It's abject nonsense. Also, there's another reason the church is not going to be happy with the written law, because, for example, the Shabbos laws, the Sabbath laws, if you're a Christian, you understand that Sabbath is on Sunday and not on Saturday. And for those of you who are Jewish or know about Jewish custom, you know that there are 39 prohibited forms of work on Shabbat you're not allowed to do. That's all learned out from the oral Torah. It doesn't say that anywhere. So can so the church says, oh, sola scriptura. That's it. Whatever it just says in the Torah. The Torah has maybe 2 prohibited forms of work. It says you can't burn a fire, which, by the way, the Karaites, one of the traditional foods we eat on Shabbat is cholent, which is basically like a chili. And the reason we have that is because the Karaites used to believe that you were not allowed to have, they took the literal translation, don't have a fire kindled in your house, don't have any lights on, and cold food, which is not the spirit of Shabbat. Shabbat is all about hot food. So that meal was created, that hot food was created because under the right circumstances, you're allowed to heat things up, keep things heated from a pre-existing fire, not one that you kindled, of course. So that was the reason, the church also didn't want to have any ties to the Talmud, because then, you would have to start keeping Shabbat and keeping it properly. So it's kind of silly, kind of foolish, and kind of, childish. So now, Will, I kind of summed up those 2 slides. So if we can go to the slide that says listen, with the guy with his hand by his ears. Got that slide?
Okay, hang on one second. Let me toggle this off.
Take your time. Yeah.
Okay, let me see.
Cool.
Sorry, and for all you viewers out there, sorry, I had some serious technical change-ups here thanks to Skype messing with me, and it's really reconfigured a lot of my things, and I can't enable certain bells and whistles that I usually do until I get this figured out. So, all right, so Masoretic text, the reasons the church in the Talmud, Constantine, not so great, stop and listen to the rabbis. What am I looking for?
Yeah, that's the slide. Stop and listen to the rabbis.
Got it. Okay,
so
you're up.
Yeah. The silly thing about what Christians claim about the Talmud being fabricated and being this, the one slide above, you went too far, right there, yeah, perfect. So the silly thing is that the King James, the Bible, the Bible of the Christians actually tells its adherents to listen to the rabbis. Paul, who is no friend of the Jewish nation, says in Romans, Perek Gimel Pasuk Beis, chapter 3, verse 2. I had to get that out of my system. Says, much every way, chiefly, because that unto them were committed the oracles of God. The them are the rabbis and the Jews. So, in other words, the Jews know about the oracles of God. So why would somebody who doesn't even know how to read Hebrew, even if they do know how to read Hebrew, but never really studied it without Christian glasses, just with an open mind, tell us who are the keepers of the law, how to practice it? Again, my analogy: if you were a plumber and I am a cab driver, I as a cab driver can't tell you, the plumber, how to do plumbing, and you, the plumber, are not going to tell me how to do my job as a taxi driver. In the next part of the same slide, Matthew 23, this is what we mentioned last week. Then spake, this is verses 1 through 3. Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying that the scribes of the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, which means that the rabbis sit in Moses' seat, that in their generation, they are like Moses. They redact and they give structure. So all therefore, whatever they bid, you observe, that observe and do. But of course, but do not ye after their works. In other words, do as they tell you to do, don't be like them, because the rabbis are bad people. Of course, Christianity is always spitting at the rabbis, but put that to the side. But the bottom line is they're telling you that whatever they tell you to do, to observe. Now, true, the audience was a Jewish audience. However, the Christian book, the New Testament, is not meant just for the Jews. it's meant for all of Christianity, meaning the non-Jews as well. So if he's telling you to listen to everything, then why aren't you following Shabbat? Why aren't you having bris milah? Why aren't you having circumcision? So it's kind of like, you're talking out of two sides of your mouth. You want to spit at the Talmud, but then you're telling them, listen to the rabbis. But just don't be like them, but listen to what they have to say. So make up your mind. Either the law has withered and is no longer extant, is no longer applicable, or the law is applicable, and stop playing games over here. Just that the whole thing is just silly. It's a game. It's almost like, a game of like, 3-card Monte, like, trying to get me confused. I don't know. People play games. Now, the next concept we're going to talk about, and this is something we mentioned on our last missionaries, is the concept of oral law and Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Well, you can go to the next slide where it says Leviticus 23:27. Okay?
Okay, hang on a second.
Take your time. It says examples of where oral law sheds light onto otherwise unintelligible passages.
Okay, well, I'm having to really go the long way around the toggle screens. So I really apologize for
No
that.
problem. I'm sorry.
It's not your fault. It's just totally on my side. Okay, examples of the oral law.
Right. So Yom Kippur is one of the most severe holidays. I don't mean it in a bad way. It's a beautiful time of the year. It gives the Jewish nation the ability to atone for its sins. So Leviticus 23:27. And again, one of you commented last week complaining, and I understand you complained about the fact that I use the King James often. The reason I use the King James is not because I believe in it. I just want to show, because it's a mixed audience, if you have Christians that will doubt the Art Scroll version or any of the Hebrew versions. So I kind of mix it in, but I did put a lot of the Hebrew passages as well. But for those of you who are new to the show, I just want to show you that if you open up your Bibles, it will say the same thing. I don't have a secret Bible. I'm not pulling something out of my shirt to fool you, God forbid. So Leviticus 23:27 says, also on the 10th day of the 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be an holy convocation unto you, and ye shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. So it doesn't tell you how to afflict it. The punishment for not afflicting yourself, and you shall do no work. So we don't know what affliction means. It says you can't do work. And in verse 29, which is, for whatsoever soul it be that shall not be afflicted in the same day, he shall be cut off from among his people. This is what we call in the language kares. Kares means to cut. Like it says, get krisis, a document of cutting when it talks about divorce. Kares is being completely cut off from God. Can you imagine being given a timeout for eternity? You're completely shunned by God. So this is the worst possible punishment one can get. So I ask you, what kind of a God would tell you that you have this massive crime, massive punishment waiting for you, tell you that you have to do this obscure affliction and not tell you how to do it? It just doesn't make sense. It's cruel. It's like pulling people over for traffic violations that are not clearly stated in the law. It's like telling you you're speeding when you don't have a speed limit. It makes no sense. And not only does it make no sense, it's crazy. It's ludicrous to believe that. And that's what I say in the next slide where it says the details. And I just basically summed it up in my previous slide, but where it says the next slide where it says details, right?
Okay.
You have ambiguities. What is work? Now, work defined in Yom Kippur is defined by whatever the prohibited forms of work are on Shabbat. Shabbat, as I mentioned earlier, has 39 prohibited laws. You're not allowed to do those on Yom Kippur as well. For example, you can't kindle a fire, and you can't make a wound that lets out blood. We're not talking about an emergency medical procedure. We're talking about a situation where, you're just, not allowed to cut. You're not allowed to slaughter an animal on Shabbat or Yom Kippur. The only exception is for the sacrificial offerings brought in the Beis Hamikdash, brought in the temple. Why? Because God said so. So God can make the rules. He can make exceptions to rules. But the point is that you and I can't interpret it at a whim and make it happen based on what our things are. Now, there are also 5 different afflictions: fasting, not bathing, not anointing with oils, not wearing leather shoes, and refraining from marital relations. Now, the one is chayiv kares is for fasting. God forbid if somebody wears leather shoes, he's not going to be chayiv kares for that. But the one that will get a person cut off from the source of God will be for eating on Yom Kippur. It's not mentioned clearly. That stuff is mentioned in Tractate Yoma, which is the Talmud, the 8th chapter in the Mishnah over there. It outlines that. So again, how could you expect me to believe that God would not tell us the details, but hold us responsible and punish us? Can there be a punishment without a clear definition of the crime? That would be bizarre, and that would be making God look like some sort of evil entity that has basically stacked the deck, stacked the card to get the cards against us in order to get us to be punished, which is cruel. I mean, if that's the vision that you want to have of God, that I feel so sorry for you. God is the most loving being and loving Father who wants to have a personal relationship with you. So I can't believe in a God that wants to hurt you. It just doesn't make any sense. Any questions?
No.
I'm pausing for a reflective pause. So far, so good?
Yep, so far so good. I think I've also got a toggling situation under control finally. It took some modifications again. Apologize for the visual distractions during this, but there really wasn't any other option.
It's Jesus in the lines. He's messing around with your he doesn't watch his stuff. I'm kidding. So the next slide, if you will, says don't cook a kid in its mother's milk or fat, ? That's a slide with a cute little goat and the bottle and the container of milk. So I've done the legwork. Well, you don't have to toggle and look for passages. Exodus 23:19. It says, right? Lo sochlu kol mevela lager asher b'shurecha. You shall not eat of anything that died of itself. You may give it to the stranger that is within thy gates. Titnano, give it, la'achla, and he will eat it. Oy machal, anachu, you sell it to the heathen. Ki am kadosha, because you are a holy nation. La Hashem Elokecha, to God your God. Loy savashul gedi, do not cook a kid. Ba chale. See, I blew up those letters. Will, if you could just make the slide a little bit bigger. You see, I've got ba chalev over here. You see where it says the first 23:19. You see the word chalev. You see the characters. For those of you who don't read Hebrew, you know what those letters look like. All right. Now, in Leviticus 3:17, you have the same letters. It says, Chukas olam darasechem, it shall be a perpetual statute throughout your generations. Stop for a second. Chukas olam darasechem. These laws apply forever. So there goes your new covenant theology and your replacement theology right there. The word forever means forever. Mm-hmm. Put that to the side. B'chol moshe seichem, in all your places where you're settled, whether you're living in Israel or where anywhere. If somebody brings you any sacrificial fats, kol chalev, kol dam lo sochel. Don't eat any blood and any chalev. So obviously, I'm not allowed to sacrifice outside the Beit HaMikdash. But let's say, for example, somebody bought me forbidden fats, I wouldn't be able to eat it. So, but again, it's the same letters: ches, lamed, and a vase, which is a vase without the little dot inside of it. Same letters. So how do I know when it's chalav? And how do I know when it's chalev? The answer is you don't. And the only way that you would know is how would you know? Is only if God tells you through the oral law. And of course, you get into huge trouble here because then you'd be reading the wrong thing. And that's not what God wants. Clarity, he wants nothing else. Right. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about a happy occasion, circumcision. The Jewish community, when the baby has a bris, it's a time of joy, a time for lox, a time for bagels, a time for scrambled eggs and bagels, but of course, circumcision. Now, of course, I would ask your average person, where do you circumcise? Where do you circumcise a child? Maybe you cut the earlobe, maybe you cut the tip of the nose. I look at you, what are you talking about? You're a barbarian? Of course you got to do where you got to do it in a person's general area. But the question I ask you is, how do you know? How do you know? If you look at the slide where it says circumcision, I bring down a couple of passages. Genesis 17:13 through 14. It says, Himo Yimo, he that is born, he who is born in your house, you shall circumcise, again. Umiknas kaspecha, anybody who's like a slave or a servant. Vayisa brisi b'b'sarcham, and it's talking about God speaking to Abraham. And this bris, this covenant will be in your flesh, the bris olam. So it's in your flesh. Now, I'm a big guy. I got a lot of flesh. Flesh could mean here, flesh could mean here, flesh could mean here. Look at the next passage, Yadalit. It says, Va'aral zachar, and an uncircumcised male. And again, we're translating it already because now we know, because based on Talmud we know. But again, when you're reading this without any translation, what does the word aral mean? Aral zachar, the circumcised male. Asher lo yimo es basar, so somebody who doesn't circumcised, right? Arlaso, his arla, we don't know what that means yet. The nichrisa hanefesh ahi, that soul will be cut off, me'ameh, from its nation, as brisi hefer. He broke the bris. So that's a pretty serious punishment, right? Well, giving somebody kares.
Right.
Now, if you look at Leviticus 19:23, you don't have to pull it up because I did it, which is on the same slide on the other side. And by the way, I'll make anybody wants it, just email me at ezdeev@gmail. I'll be happy to share it with you later today. It says, "V'chisavo ela aretz," and when you come into the kol eitz Michael, when you will plant any manner of food tree, baraltem arlaso, and you shall count the fruit thereof as forbidden. Shalosh shanim, for 3 years. Yiyah lachem aralchem lo yachol. It should be forbidden to you and not eaten. Again, arla aralchem, the same word. I don't know about you, Bill. I've never seen a moel, somebody who does Jewish circumcisions for babies, go over to a tree with a knife and circumcise a tree.
Right.
Have you ever seen a tree circumcised? I don't think so.
Not sure what that would
Again,
look like.
it's the same word. Right. I don't know how that would work. It just doesn't make sense. So the same word, arla. How do I know what it means? Next slide. This will make your head spin. For this, I'm going to ask you, Will, to bring up Exodus 6:30.
Okay, on the next slide, where Moses tells Hashem speech impediment. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Moses is a very humble man, and just to give people a context where he got the speech impediment from, and this is all brought down in the Medrash. When he was a little baby, Pharaoh's advisors tried to convince Pharaoh that Moses wanted his crown, so they gave him the crown and a bunch of hot coals. And as a baby, I don't know what kind of stupid test this was, but I guess they wanted to kill him. So babies usually go after shiny things. So as he was reaching to the crown, an angel came from heaven and pushed his hands towards the coal. He burnt his hand and he put it in his mouth. And of course, he burnt his mouth. And as a result of the burn in his mouth, he had a speech impediment. So this is talking about when God sends Moses on his commission to speak to Paro. Vayomer Moshe, 6:30. Lifnei Hashem, and God said, Moses said before God, behold, hein ani aral. Again, the word aral.
One second. I don't have it up yet. Hang on just a minute. You said Deuteronomy 6:30?
No, not Deuteronomy, Exodus.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Hang on.
Sorry.
No, that was my fault. Exodus 6:30.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, there it is.
It says, Vayomer Moshe, Lifnei Hashem, and Moshe said in front of God, hein ani aral sifasayim. I am of uncircumcised lips. Again, we don't circumcise trees. Does anybody circumcise lips? What does this mean? That means that the word aral has 3 different meanings in 3 different passages. How in the world are we supposed to know what it means? I have made the Agaya in it, right? And by the way, go to 7:1, by the way,
okay,
where it says, I made you a god to Paro. The Hebrew word that is used there is Elohim. So any of you Trinitarians out there that want to prove that God has multiple personality disorder, right? Moses is made into an Elohim, into a god, meaning he represents God. But I don't know any Christians or any people that worship Moses. There's no Christian denomination as the Father, the Son, and Moses, as far as I know. Just as a side point. But getting back to the point of this, is that since we have aral sifasayim, again, we have the word arla. So how do we know what arla means when it comes to circumcision? How do we know? The answer is very simple. If we can go to the next slide.
Okay. Again, this is where Moses tells Hashem.
The next one. What no details?
Oh, gotcha. Very good. Okay, you're up.
No problem. It says, what no details? Well, don't worry. There is the oral Torah. It tells in many different places. There's a Talmud Kedushin, 29a. No, the next 2 slides forward.
You're watching a delay, remember?
Oh, delay. Okay, no problem. Kedushin, 29a. Mishnah Shabbat 19.2 and 19.6 discuss the laws of circumcision. Further laws of circumcision are discussed in what we call the Shulchan Aruch, the set table, which is a book which codified all of the laws. A lot of complicated laws. How much has to be circumcised? How it's circumcised? What kind of tools do you use for circumcision? And what the procedure is, and of course the liturgy, the prayers that are offered up. So of course it's a complicated matter, not for this show how a bris is done, and it's not really important. But what is important to show you that without the oral law, you wouldn't even know what a circumcision is all about.
Right.
You can't tell me, well, it's obvious in the context. It's not obvious from the context. I just showed you evidence. Unlike other people that come and talk from their stomachs, I'm talking out of a place of knowledge. I just brought you 3 scriptures, 3 passages in 3 different areas using the same word, meaning 3 different things. So how could you tell me that you don't need an oral law? Make sense?
Perfect.
Now, I guess we can make a country, we can make a one of those spaghetti westerns. We'll call it, John Wayne, An Eye for an Eye. That would be a good name for a spaghetti western, right?
For sure.
This town ain't big enough for both of us. I'm going to give an eye for an eye. Now, if you look at that slide with the eye, it's the 2 eyes.
Okay.
Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on over here. Exodus 21, 22 through 25. Okay. And now there's a lot of oral law behind this. It would take me hours to explain it to you because there's just so many different things happening in the background. I'm not going to do that. Just when I just read the passages, and let's pretend the oral law doesn't exist for a second. Okay. I'm going to put this away. We're going to play a game and pretend it doesn't exist. Okay. Right. Exodus 21, 23 to 25. It's on the slide. If men strive, meaning they're fighting, it's Jacoby in English, but okay, and hurt a woman with child. So they hurt a pregnant lady. So they're 2 guys fighting. Now, we don't even know, are they trying to kill each other? Are they not trying to kill each other? Are they just fighting, play fighting? By the way, the Talmud tells you that they're trying to kill each other and they end up hurting the woman, okay? So that her fruit depart from her, she miscarries, and yet no mischief follow. He shall be surely punished according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall be pay as the judges determine. How do the judges determine the payment for this accident? We don't have what they're going to do. How do you evaluate it? Where do we have any criteria? Now, verse 23, and if any mischiefs follow, meaning the person dies, the woman dies, then thou shalt give life for life, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning and for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So if the oral law is made up by the rabbis and it's fake news, then how do missionaries explain these very, very odd passages? Do we follow sola scriptura? How do the judges define the damages? Do we pluck out people's eyes? Do we bust? Do we smack people in their mouths and break their teeth? Do we take a blowtorch or a flamethrower and burn people? I mean, could you imagine if you were to read this without an oral Torah? People would be walking around without eyes, without teeth, without arms. I mean, William, this would be scary. Well, what kind of world would we be living in if you followed the Torah without an oral Torah? You'd be poking people's eyes out, and you make fun of me not tearing toilet paper in Shabbos. That's funny. That's stupid. But if you read the written Torah and you see an eye for an eye, you want me to believe sola scriptura that I poke somebody's eye out? Right. Is there anybody out there that'll tell you that's the definition of poking an eye out? And there'll be some apologists say, no, you do the damages and you evaluate what the person's eye is. Just, okay, very nice, but where does it say it? And it's not logical. Because remember, how can I say something is logical if all I'm following is what the script says? I can't read into the script what I want it to say. I need to have something explained to me. That's why it's important. That's why the Torah, the oral Torah, is given over from one Rebbe to his Talmud, to his protege, and so on and so forth. That's the reason why it's so important to have an oral Torah. Now, the next slide is going to be mind-blowing, okay? So I'm going to give a little background. If you could pull up Deuteronomy 19:19 for a second.
Okay, sure.
And read it for me, because I don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
You read it for me.
All right, sure.
Okay, go ahead.
1 second.
Participation. Well, you got to participate over
here.
Hey,
that's good. It's going to help keep me awake. Hang on. Tell me the verse again. I'm switching screens.
Deuteronomy 19:19.
All right, 19:19. And there you go. Cool. All right, let's see. All right, you want the Hebrew or the English? English. Then shall you do
the English to me, yeah.
Then shall you do unto him as he had thought to have done to his brother. So shall you put evil away from among you.
Okay, so what's going on over here? I'll tell you what the oral Torah tells you. Because again, you read that verse, William. I mean, you're like, what? Mm-hmm. So there's a concept called Adim, Adim is the plural of witnesses. Zomimim, plotting witnesses. What's the situation? I'll give you a scenario. A and B come to court and say that C did something wrong. He stole, capital crime, whatever it is. And now Besdin, the court, says, you know what? He is liable for that action. He's going to be put to death. They utter a death sentence. And before they put him to death, 2 other witnesses come and say, A and B, you could not have seen C do anything wrong because you were with us on the other side of the world transacting business. There's no way you could have seen that. So that passage in Deuteronomy 19:19 is telling you that if witnesses plotted to get somebody knocked off and they're proven to be liars, you will do to them the same thing that they tried to do to somebody else. That's what we call reciprocal punishment. That's what we call in Hebrew Edom Zomimim. There's an entire tractate devoted to this called Makot, which means whips, hitting, wounds. Now that we understand the concept over there, now we're going to break it down. We're going to go back to the slide where it says lose in court and get flogged. Anyone interested in a good beating?
Okay.
You have that slide?
Got it up.
Awesome. So Deuteronomy 25:1-2. If there be a controversy between men, and they come unto judgment, that the judges may judge them, then they shall justify the righteous and condemn the wicked. Okay, so two people going to court. They have a disagreement. And it shall be, if the wicked man be worthy to be beaten, that the judges shall cause him to lie down and to be beaten before his face according to his fault by a certain number. Wait a minute. Whoa. So you mean to tell me, again, we don't know what's going on. Two people have a traffic, they have a fender bender, or I don't know, they have some sort of civil lawsuit. And I go to Besdin, I go to the Jewish court, and I lose. So then I get beaten. Right. They take off my shirt and they start whipping me. Now, the oral law asks this question, actually. Where does it ask it? It asks it in Masechet Makot, the tractate of Makot, which talks about what I just told you in Deuteronomy 19:19 about Edom Zomim, these witnesses that tried to get somebody knocked off, and other witnesses came in and refuted their testimony. There are certain cases where the reciprocal punishment is not administered. I don't want to go into those cases because they're very, very complicated, but there are two cases that the Gemara, that the Talmud brings down and says they are the exception to the rule. They don't get the exact same thing they try to give the other person. Instead, they get flogged. Flogging is a very painful process. They take this big guy who's really strong, goes to the gym, eats steroids for breakfast, give him this big bull whip. They take off the shirt and they beat you to an inch of your life. Now, the Gemara there asked, just because you lost in court, that's why you get beaten? So the Torah says, the oral tradition is that passage, Deuteronomy 25:1-2, is talking about such a case of Edom Zomim, of two witnesses that plotted to get somebody in trouble. They get beaten. They're the ones. Why? Because what happens is they try to make this person into a Russia, into a bad guy, into a wicked guy. Comes along the other two witnesses. They take the wicked guy, who's this guy who's being accused, reinstate him to his good status of being a righteous person, and make the original two witnesses wicked, and then they get beaten instead. Now, if you read, that's a lot of complicated stuff I threw at you, but that's not what you would read into this passage. If you just read this passage, these two passages, without the oral Torah, you think, okay, you go to court, you have a disagreement, and it shall be the wicked man will be worthy of being beaten. Wicked? I became wicked because I lost in court. That's Sodom and Gomorrah. If you don't have the Torah, the oral Torah, you're poking out people's eyes, you're cutting off people's legs, you're burning people, you're beating them if they lose in court. This is Sodom. This is not a normal society. William, I mean, tell me if I'm off the wall over here.
No, I'm
Read these passages. You don't think they're weird?
Right.
You don't think they're barbaric?
They need explanation, plain and simple.
I mean, honestly, this is like reading something out of some mythological, I don't know, some crazy book. It's like a Harry Potter book. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It's crazy. Now, wait, there's more.
Of course.
In 1995, you too can supersize your order. Order now. So the Talmud, we know, gave you enough examples, and there are a lot more. Believe me, I could have given you dozens more, but we're pressed for time. The New Testament actually depends on the Talmud. Now, again, all the missionaries out there are hell-bent on believing that the New Testament has a Trinity in it. The New Testament did not believe in the Talmud, has no references to the Talmud, has nothing to do with the Talmud. The Talmud is totally non-existent in the New Testament. Now, I'm just going to give you a historical note over here. Before Christians were Jews, I want to spoiler alert for people out there. Jesus ate gefilte fish. Shh, don't tell anybody. He went to shul on Shabbos. He put tefillin on, and he got bar mitzvahed. You hear that? Jesus was Jewish, and so were all his followers. James, his brother, was Jewish. He had a separate church in Jerusalem. Okay, so the early Jews who were the early Christians, followed the oral law. So if you went over to an early Christian and said, and you try to give them an Isaiah 53 pamphlet and say, there's no oral law. Jesus, what are you talking about? No oral law? Look at Acts 1, chapter 1, verse 12. Then returned they unto Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is from Jerusalem a Sabbath day journey. Now, William, back when we were still in the Messianic circles, if you read that chapter, what did you think that meant? I mean, what did the pastors tell you that meant? What's a Sabbath day journey?
Right.
What would they tell you?
That's one of the.
What would they say?
You know, that's one of the one things that that actually opened my eyes to seeing, again, proof that there had to have been something oral, something that was explained that everybody knew that just doesn't happen to show up anywhere in the known Bible of our world. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And it would stand to reason that the New Testament, which is written for humanity, would be written in such a way that would give references to things that exist and that were understood at the time and should be understood by its adherents. If something's written in the New Testament, everybody should understand it, right? It's not
right.
They're not putting stuff in there that shouldn't be understood. They're putting stuff in that they want you to understand.
Right.
So what is it talking about? What's a Sabbath day journey? I'll just quickly explain it to you. There's a law called Techum Shabbos. Basically what it is that wherever you are, you have 2,000 cubits, about 8,000 feet that you're allowed to walk in each direction. That only applies when you're out of the city limits. So if I live in Brooklyn, New York, I live in Queens, New York, I have every 70 and a half cubits, I have another house. So my Techum, my Sabbath day journey gets reset. My Sabbath day journey starts when I leave populated society, and then let's say I'm in some highway in Texas, right? I leave the city, I leave Kingsland, and I don't know what's your main highway over there? What's the main highway?
Yeah, probably
Texas.
I-35 goes through Texas, straight through Texas.
I-35 in the middle of nowhere. I leave Kingsland, I'm on I-35, there are no buildings, nothing. That's where my Techum Shabbos starts. This is brought down in the tractate Shabbat Shabbos and also Eruvin, another tractate in the Babylonian Talmud. But again, very complicated laws, which were known at the time. And you can't tell me that it doesn't exist. Now, if you look at the next bullet, it says Exodus 16:29. This is the source of Techum Shabbos. See, for that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. Whoa. So you mean to tell me I have to sit in my house all Shabbos long? Shut the door, sit at my table in the dark, eat cold food? That's Shabbos? That's a holiday? That's the way you want me to understand? That's what Shabbos is all about? Really? That's a bit extreme, wouldn't you say? More extreme than not ripping toilet paper on Shabbos, I believe. Wouldn't you agree?
Right.
Okay, so before we go to the next slide of John 7:22-23, I want to explain the concept of Kal V'chomer. And for all you gun lovers out there, you'll love it. And for those of you who are pacifists, you won't. But I just wanted you to give this example, not because I'm pro or against guns. I don't want to get into that conversation.
Right.
But a Kal V'chomer is a fancy, in fancy terms, in Latin, it's called an a fortiori argument. What does it mean? Let's say the state of New York says you're not allowed to carry a pistol in public. It's illegal to do open carry. They don't have to spell it out for you and tell you that, by the way, you can't walk into Grand Central Station with an AK-47 or an AR-15 on your shoulder. If I'm not allowed to carry a small sidearm, I can't walk around with a bazooka. I can't walk around with an RPG. I can't walk around with artillery connected to the hitch of my truck. Makes sense, right?
Right.
So, Kyle, something from the weaker case, I learned to the more strict case. So now, the context of John 7:22-23 for my Jewish listeners or for my listeners who don't know what's going on over there is that the rabbis and Jesus are having a machloket, a fight, a debate on Shabbat. I guess that was the day set aside for arguing. And what they charged Jesus for healing on Shabbos. I'm just going to tell you something. There's no prohibition for praying for somebody on Shabbat. We do it in every synagogue. We do what we call a mi sheberach, he who blesses. We have a list of sick people. The rabbi reads them out, and we say a special prayer so that they are healed. So allegedly, Jesus heals somebody. He didn't make any wounds. He didn't do open heart surgery, which he'd be allowed to do, by the way. If somebody's mortally wounded or is in danger of losing a limb, the halacha says, the Jewish law says, you're allowed to save the limb. You're allowed to help the person. You're allowed to call an ambulance. So the whole argument is silly. But what does he say? He says Moses if you look at 7:22, Moses therefore gave unto you circumcision, not because it is of Moses, but of the fathers, and ye on the Sabbath day circumcise a man. So how do we know? Whoa. You're telling me I could circumcise somebody on Shabbat. It doesn't say that anywhere that you're allowed to break the Shabbat for circumcision. Where do we know that from? Okay. Verse 23, if a man on the Sabbath day receives circumcision, that the law of Moses should not be broken, are ye angry at me? Because I have made a man every whit whole on the Sabbath day? What's he saying in non-Jacobian English? He's saying, if for a small operation I'm allowed to do it, right? In Shabbat I'm allowed to do a bris, I can do a circumcision, and I fix one small part of a person's body, and I'm allowed to do it as Moses said in his law. Which law? The oral law, because it doesn't say anything about doing bris on Shabbos. That's all brought down in Masechet Shabbos, in the Tractate Shabbos. All those laws are brought down. So for sure, I'm allowed to heal somebody's entire body. If I could heal a small part of somebody's body, the general area, by doing a circumcision, then for sure I could pray and heal an entire person. That's his argument back. That is something called a Kal V'chomer, which would explain what's going on. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
So this is the final stretch of the show. And listen, all of you listening, whatever denomination you are, you better listen to this, because this is going to blow your mind out of your skull. And I can guarantee you've never heard this argument before. Okay, little background. Ruth, the book of Ruth, she was a Moabite princess. She came to Naomi and she converted. She married Boaz. They had a child named Obed, who had a child named Jesse, who had a child named David, and that is King David. Now, what happens? Luke 3:31 and Matthew 1:6, you can look it up. I didn't make this up. Look it up on your own time. Claim that Jesus is related to David. Why does Jesus have to be related to David? You tell me, well, why does Jesus have to be related to David according to Christianity?
Right. He's got to come from the descendant. Well, theoretically, anyway. But
I mean, theoretically, why is it so important? Because otherwise, you can't have a claim to the Messiahship, right? He doesn't have a claim anyway, which we'll explain in a few minutes. But why? Because you have to be of Davidic stock. You have to be of the Scott, the shoot of Jesse. Now, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says in chapter 23, verse 3 in a Christian Bible and verse 4 in a Hebrew Bible, and I'm going to read it in Hebrew. It says, Lo yavi Imoni umo avi, an Ammonite and a Moabite may not come, but Kal Hashem, in the congregation of God, Gamdor Asu, even the 10th generation, Lo yavu lahem, should not come into them, but Kal Hashem, ad olam, forever. And the reason is because when the Jews in the desert, they refused to give water and food. And remember Lot, who was the progenitor of Ammon and Moab, he slept with his daughters because the daughters felt that Sodom was destroyed. They thought the whole world was destroyed. So they had to repopulate the world. They got him drunk in the cave. And Ammon and Moab came out of that. And who saved Abraham, right? Abraham saved them.
Right.
So instead of being thankful and helping the Jewish nation, hooking up a brother, as they say, with food, what did they do? They did nothing. They gave them they gave them ill treatment. So God says, no. Converts of your type we don't want, because you don't have gratitude to people. Therefore, we're not interested. You have to be you're out of you don't make it to the 40-man roster. You're not coming to spring training. You're done.
Right.
So now, if you apply sola scriptura and you don't have a Talmud, what happens? Then Jesus has no claim to the throne, because King David isn't Jewish. Why? Because his grandmother Ruth isn't Jewish. His father Jesse isn't allowed to come into the congregation, nor his grandfather Obed. So what happens? Checkmate. Tiyufta the Jesus Tiyufta. The word Tiyufta in Aramaic means you're done. You're finished. It's broken down. So it means there's no claim to the throne. So if you don't adopt now what happens? Who comes to the rescue? The Talmud in Kesuvot 7a states that the whole prohibition of an Ammonite and a Moabite only applies to the men. Why to the men? Because the men are the ones that are supposed to invite people in. Women are supposed to be more sniut. They're supposed to be more fine and not talk to men. And therefore, it's not the job of the woman to go invite people off the street. It's more the job of the man. Therefore, the women were the ones that were allowed to convert, not the men. So without this oral transmission, the book of Luke and the book of Matthew would have nothing to even start with. Now, as a final fait accompli, we can go to the one which says Jesus' false claim to the Davidic Messianic throne. This is the last slide. the reason Jesus can't be the Messiah is because according to the book of Matthew, he's from God. God impregnated his mother, which is adultery, which is crazy as it is. I mean, great excuse. Your husband comes home, finds you pregnant. It was God. Oh, okay.
Right.
I guess Joseph was really gullible. Don't try that at home, kids. Okay? That would be that would be stupid. But in any case, why is it a silly claim? Because we know in Numbers 1:18 it says, and they assembled all the congregations together on the first day of the second month, and they declared their pedigrees after their families by their fathers' houses. It's the father's house that counts. You go after the father's lineage. So don't give me this nonsense. I heard one preacher say, well, it's adopted. He adopted him. Nonsense. It doesn't say anything about adopted children.
Right.
If my father adopts me and he's a Kohen, he's of the priestly sect, I cannot be called up to the Sefer Torah first, right? The law is in a synagogue, the Kohen gets the first aliyah, is called up to the Torah every Shabbat. But if I'm adopted, that doesn't work for me. So if Jesus' father is God, then he can't be Messiah anyway. And why would God want to impregnate Mary in an adulterous fashion? Why couldn't Jesus be born as a regular person? And what's really comical about this, the book of Mark, which chronologically is the first gospel, doesn't even introduce Jesus as a baby, and we don't know who he is until the 8th chapter. What, you forgot to tell me about the virgin birth? Can you imagine if the book of Exodus forgot to tell you about Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah? Oh, gee, I forgot to tell you that. Let me mention it quickly in the book of Ezekiel. That would be insane. Final slide.
Okay.
Conclusion, ladies and gentlemen out there of the free-thinking world, you need the oral law. Without the oral law, the Hebrew scriptures are unintelligible, and Jesus' claim to the messiahship is impossible, besides the fact that the New Testament is fake. You cannot separate the oral law from the written law. A body cannot live without a heart. The written Torah cannot exist without the Torah law. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for giving me time. William, thank you for giving me your time. Please, again, email me at ezdeev@gmail.com. I'll be happy to try to answer your questions. And again, have a blessed week. And we'll be talking. We have some good ideas for some future shows. Thank you very much. It's time to go daven mincha. Time to pray to the one God, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Amen.
Bless you all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you, brother. Shalom, shalom, and thank you all for tuning in. Sorry, next show will go much more smoothly. I'll have all these bugs worked out. So, meanwhile, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and turn on notifications. That way you can be alerted every time we record. Take care, everybody. Shalom, shalom.
Thanks, Will.
You bet. See you, boss. Bye.
Thanks a lot. We'll be in touch.
Okay,
right?
sounds good, dude. Bye.
חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. אני אתה אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד. חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד.